Hey everyone, it's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and in today's video we'll be discussing the Modern Defense. The Modern Defense is a hyper-modern chess opening where black is going to try to attack white's center from afar instead of occupying the center themselves right away. It can actually be played against either the king's pawn opening or the queen's pawn opening. I'll just show you the move order with e4 to start with, and after e4 black's going to play g6, just preparing to put this bishop on the g7 square. White can take the full center if they want to, and now bishop g7. White's going to get a space advantage for the time being, but black is going to finish up their development and then try to strike at this center later, possibly with a move like pawn to c5. I've always found it a little bit tricky to study the modern defense because both sides simply have so many options. There's really no early threats or pawn tension, so both sides are kind of free to do whatever they want. But there are some critical lines to go over, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So let's start with one of white's most ambitious lines, where they simply play knight to c3, and they plan to play f4 next, really taking all the space they can get and going for an attack on the king side. So okay, knight to c3, black's going to play d6 here most of the time. This move simply opens up black's other bishop, and possibly prepares later on to either play c5, or to play knight d7 and then c5. It's a very flexible move that can be helpful in almost any setup. White can play here f4, and now black could play knight f6 if they wanted to. That's actually a very popular move here, but I would not consider this a modern defense anymore if black played this move. This would actually be a well-known line from the Peert's defense, which begins with, I'll just go back and show it, e4 d6, d4 knight f6, just pressuring this pawn right away, and then black's going to fianchetto. The modern defense is a very close cousin of the Peert's defense, but generally in the modern defense, if we go back to our position here, black is going to delay playing this move knight to f6, which serves a couple purposes. Number one, it leaves this bishop open for the time being to pressure white's center. And number two, it makes a lot of white's plans with an early e5 less effective because there's no knight on f6 here to kick away. Of course, the downside is that if black does not play knight f6 here, it's going to be a while before they can castle and get their king out of the center. But okay, if black's not going to play f6 and go back to the Peert's defense, their most popular move here is a6. This is very much in the spirit of the modern defense. Black's just not doing anything committal just yet. They're simply preparing to play b5 next, possibly trying to drive this knight away with b4. They might want to put this bishop on b7 to target the center from afar as well. And of course, a later c5 is also still on the table. So I'll just show a couple sample lines from here. White can play knight f3, b5, bishop d3, now the knight comes to d7. This is often the best square for this knight in these setups, both to prepare c5 and to stay out of the bishop's way after the bishop comes to b7. White could castle here, that's one possibility, and now black will probably play c5. We see that black is striking back at the center. White can go ahead and take there on c5, and now after knight takes c5, bishop e3, black can go ahead and obtain the bishop pair if they want to. And of course, white still has the strong center here to compensate them for that, and we're going to get an interesting game. Also, after knight d7, white does not have to just castle. e5 is a very popular try here from white, just depriving this knight of the f6 square, shutting down this bishop and grabbing more space. And after c5, we see another point is that now the e4 square is free for the white pieces, and white will often try here bishop to e4, attacking that rook. Black can simply save the rook though with rook to b8, white can castle, c takes d4, queen takes d4 is now a popular move. The queen can't really be harassed here in the center because there's no ideas with knight c6 or anything. This knight is already developed here to the d7 square. So the knight can come to c5. We've seen this is a common theme for that knight to activate itself after the pawns get exchanged here in the center. And I saw some games continued here with bishop c6, bishop d7, and these bishops get exchanged. And white probably has a slight advantage here. White's a little bit better developed. This king is still not castled. But if black can succeed in tearing down this center here with this tension here on the e5 pawn, this bishop could become a very active piece again on this long diagonal. So we looked at a6 here, intending b5. I want to point out that c6 is another possibility black has, again trying to play b5, possibly even in some lines intending to play d5 later on. Again, there's so many options that both sides have in the modern defense. I just want to point out some of the main ones. Coming back here after knight c3 d6, we looked at playing f4. Now we'll consider what if white just plays bishop e3, intending queen d2, possibly playing kind of Yugoslav attack style, thinking about exchanging this bishop off later with bishop h6, maybe even thinking about a kingside pawn storm with h4, h5 to open the h-file. Let's see how this idea can go. Black can still play a6 here, just trying to expand on the queen side to coordinate with this bishop that's already aiming there. And now queen to d2, b5, f3 is white's most popular move here. This move is common in a lot of lines where white tries to pawn storm the king side. White also just wants to make sure that the center is stabilized in case this knight gets kicked away and this bishop comes to b7. So now knight to d7, we've seen this move before. White could play here h4, and there's actually nothing wrong now with black just playing h5, trying to stop this pawn in its tracks. I pulled one sample line from here that a few games have followed. White can play knight to h3, just developing that knight. Bishop b7, castle long, rook c8. We see that black is really preparing this c5 advance, trying to open some lines here on the queen side, where the white king now resides. And we might see knight to g5, c5. If these pawns get exchanged, once again, this knight's going to hop out here to the c5 square. And white has sometimes tried to exchange off these dark squared bishops, but black will usually now play knight f6, finally develop that knight, and avoid that exchange because they don't want to give up this powerful g7 fianchettoed bishop. After white plays king b1, that's a very normal move here whenever you castle queenside, just tucking the king away. Black has tried here in a couple games queen to a5, possibly intending to play b4 at the right moment, and once again we have a very murky, unclear, imbalanced game, which is the reason a lot of players like to play the modern defense. Just to further illustrate the point that both sides have so much flexibility in this opening to play on both sides of the board, we looked at white's idea to play h4, h5 here. White's second most popular move is actually to play a4, just striking at the completely opposite side of the board. White's threatening to open up the a-file and to win a pawn here on b5, so black really needs to push that pawn. And after b4, knight d1, now white's going to try to use this pawn to open up lines on the queen side, for example by playing c3. The pawn's actually hanging right now, so black goes ahead and defends it with a5, but now c3, b takes c3, this knight redevelops to c3. Black can play c6 to stop white from using the b5 square for now. And now we might see rook c1, the knight finally develops to f6, white plays bishop d3 to try to finish up their kingside development after knight e2 comes next, and once again we're left to play an imbalanced middle game after black just goes ahead and gets castled. Coming back here after knight c3, so far we've been looking at playing d6 and playing a little bit more slowly for black, trying to expand later on with a6 and b5. Black also sometimes plays c5 right away, trying to strike at this center, and this is called the pterodactyl defense. I have no idea how it got that name, so if you happen to know, please let me know down in the comments. But the idea is pretty interesting. This is a pawn sacrifice, but if white accepts the pawn sacrifice, white can easily end up with tripled pawns. I know queen a5 is a move here, trying to pile up on this knight and attack the pawn. Also, bishop takes c3 is a popular move, and the names here get pretty silly. I think this is called the pteranodon variation or something. But after b takes c3, queen a5, black is down a pawn, but we see the white pawns here are very weak. The main line goes queen d4, trying to defend all the pawns and counterattacking the rook for the time being. And now after knight f6, the point is that white is going to play queen b4 and try to fix their pawns. Black can play knight c6 though, refusing to untriple those pawns. And now after queen takes a5, knight takes a5, we end up with this position, but white has actually scored pretty well here after simply playing bishop d3 to defend this pawn. I think the problem here for black is that even though these pawns are tripled, it's kind of hard to see how black should finish up their development, because if you play either b6 or d6, opening up this bishop, you're going to let white exchange off one of those tripled pawns. So because this position has been worked out to be a little bit pleasant for white, black has tried looking for improvements earlier on in this variation, perhaps playing queen a5 first before bishop takes c3, or perhaps deviating from that line later on. It's an interesting line to look into if you want to play this as black. Finally, just to show one more idea, we've looked at a bunch of lines where white plays knight to c3. White can actually play this move c4 here, just trying to grab some more space here in the center. And this stops black from implementing a lot of their ideas here, such as a6, b5 very early in the opening. Black can still play d6, and now knight c3, and it looks like we're going to transpose into a King's Indian defense. In fact, if black played knight to f6 here, this would be one of the main lines of the King's Indian defense. So that's an option for black, but if black wants to try to keep the game in modern defense territory, they might want to look for an alternative here. e5 is a move that's been tried, just trying to strike at the center. And white has tried all sorts of moves here. White's tried d5, white's tried to take on e5 and meet bishop takes e5 with even f4, grabbing some more space. White has tried simply knight to f3 defending the d-pawn, and this often leads back to a King's Indian defense as well. For example, after knight to d7, bishop e2, knight g to f6, and both players castling. This is a line from the King's Indian defense, but it's not considered one of the most threatening for black. Going back here after e5, if white plays d5 here, closing the center like we see in the King's Indian, black has even tried playing f5 right away in some games. We know in the King's Indian, when white locks up the center, usually black has to move a knight away from f6 and then play f5 and then bring it back to f6 to try to get their counterplay going here on the king side. Black's trying to save a couple tempos here. Now, of course, after e takes f5, g takes f5, queen h5 check, black is forced to play this move king to f8. Objectively, this probably favors white, but it is a very interesting idea. Black has a lot of space here in the center. This knight can come to f6 with tempo now, and the game is still pretty unclear. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please make sure you click the link down in the description to visit chesspathways.com and get signed up there. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds, and I will send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you join our community. It took me way too long to become a chess master, and I'm hoping to help you do it in a fraction of the time. Thanks, and I'll see you there.